Our presentation is called Reamer's 7 Steps and Ethical Dilemmas. This is by Adrienne Walsh, Barbara Hucka, Mercedes Cooper, and Dante Garcia. In our ethical scenario, the social worker is assigned to Andrea, a mother to a 4-year-old named Richard. Andrea became pregnant with Richard when she was in high school, and though she still visits her son, albeit irregularly, he has been in the foster care system since he was 6 months old. The social worker takes note of her hostile disposition. This can be evidenced by her physical and verbal abuse of Richard, as reported by the foster parents. Andrea also reportedly states that she no longer wants to see her son and has repeatedly threatened to surrender her parental rights. Richard's father is unknown. In the first step of Reamer's 7 steps, it is critical to first identify ethical issues within the case. The obvious issues in this scenario are the mother's inconsistencies, her abusive nature with the child, and her outspoken desire to relinquish parental rights. There is no father present to help, and Andrea started her parenting journey already at a disadvantage because she was so young and still in school. She may not have had a good support system or resources to get her on her feet. So normally in this situation, it would appear very cut and dry as to how to address it. Most people would likely agree that she should lose parental rights. But as a social worker, all options must be considered before making such a permanent decision. So why is it an ethical dilemma? The social worker, acting as the advocate for Andrea, has a responsibility to weigh the ethical reasoning behind accepting Andrea's request to relinquish rights and ensuring due diligence is made to create a safe and stable home for Richard with his mom if possible. The social worker would have to set aside any personal bias or feelings to look at Andrea's situation objectively. There is empirical evidence that highlights the importance of a parent's involvement in a child's life. Not only is it the parent's right by law to protect, support, and carry the burden of care, but when the child is stripped of those basic needs and placed in foster care, it can cause psychological harm to both the parents and the child. There is no guarantee that Richard will be treated well in foster care. The potential is there that he could be bounced around in the foster system and never adopted. Furthermore, Andrea may be behaving the way she does because she has not had the resources to care for herself or her son. She does not receive help from Richard's father. It is evident that she needs psychological care to address her anger problems. She also may feel bitter because she's unable to fulfill her duties as a parent. The social worker has to consider that she may harness the ability to be a good mother if given the proper resources. However, Andrea has not expressed an interest in getting her son back in 3.5 years. So this is an ethical dilemma because though the social worker is advocating for Andrea, they are also faced with what is in the best interest of the child.
So I am going to be analyzing this case by the Reamer's 7-step decision-making process. First, identify the ethical issues, including the social work values and duties that conflict. So it's first very important to note that the most highest priority here of ethical duty would be to act in the best interest of the child. So the social worker needs to ensure that that social justice is served by making sure that mother and child are both being served to the best of their ability, given the resources and provided the opportunity to get help. And the social worker also must report any abuse done to the child, whether that be verbal or physical. As reported was Andrea was seen slapping the child and demonstrating verbal abuse towards Richard. The social worker should also honor the importance of the human relationship, acknowledging the mother and child relationship, and hopefully giving the ability for restoration for Andrea with her child, having that mother and child bond. And so the value of watching a child being mistreated may be a conflict for the social worker because it is in the best interest of the child to not be abused or mistreated. The mother is negligent to her child, but when she visits him, and she's infrequent with her visits, so she's kind of negligent and harming him whenever she does see the child. So that might create some conflict with the social worker, and ethically wanting to act in best interest of the child, and kind of just having that bias of the mother does not need to be with the child. Second is to identify the individuals, groups, and organizations that are likely to be affected by the ethical decision. In this case, the individuals that would be affected would be obviously the child, Richard, the mother, Andrea, perhaps the foster parents that are placed in responsibility of the child, but also the monitoring agency of the child, whether that be Child Protective Services or ACH or whoever is the umbrella that is delegated to protect the child. And then tentatively identify all possible courses of action and the participants involved in each, along with possible benefits and risks for each. So the possible course of action would be that the mother receives services that allow her to work on her own issues that may break down the barriers she faces with parenting her child. So, for example, giving the opportunity to participate in parenting classes, anger management classes, therapy, mental health, maybe some substance abuse treatment if she has any issues with that. So I think on an ethical platform, it's important to note that the mother should also get the opportunity to rehabilitate and reform before completely withdrawing rights from the child. So the risk of that would be that the mother does not commit to the services and fakes compliancy to gain access to Richard, and then then ends up going back to the mother and being in a toxic or abusive environment. But the benefits would be that if the mother did have the opportunity and the resources and was able to make those changes, that Richard would be given the opportunity to be with his mother and kind of restore that mother-child relationships. Again, reiterating the importance of relationships for the ethical value. Four in the Reamer decision-making process says to thoroughly examine the reason in favor of and opposed to each possible course of action, and considering the relevant ethical theories, principles, and guidelines, code of ethics and legal principles, social work practice theory and principles, personal values, including religious, cultural, and ethnic values and political ideology, particularly those that conflict with one's own. So obviously in favor, as a social worker, I think it's important to note that the mother should be given the opportunity to rehabilitate and honor the ethics code, providing services to better her mental state and ability to care for her child. And like I said, that could be done through parenting classes, maybe some mental health treatment, maybe some substance abuse treatment, trauma therapy, if she has any personal issues going on that may be underneath the core of why she's resentful towards Richard or mistreats him the way that she does. And I think that social justice also would need to be served there, because the mother, being a teenage mother, she may be unaware of how to care for her child and not having the knowledge to demonstrate love due to personal childhood experience, or and also she's a statistic who has to overcome obstacles through opportunities to reform, and she may need the resources to get those reform treatments, possibly, like I said, mental health treatment, parenting classes, behavioral classes, just working with a team of professionals to be, gain the resources, because she's a teen mom. She doesn't have educational or financial backing. She's straight out of high school, so she may not have the knowledge or the emotional capacity to deal with Richard, and might need to be given those life skills. So also that would be demonstrating the dignity and worth as a person. And so by allowing Andrea, the mother, the opportunity to parent her child, giving the mother skills to feel worthy of parenting Richard, keeping and also keeping the mother and child together, would also acknowledge the importance of human relationships, because there's no replacement for a mother for a child. That bond is already solidified in that maternal relationship. So doing the due diligence of ensuring that mother and child relationship is remains intact if it's possible, so that it could possibly be in the best interest of Richard. And if it's not, then we would be able to examine that at that time. So keeping the mother and child, keeping the mother and child together acknowledges the importance of human relationships. So we would also be acting with integrity, ensuring that Richard is protected and provided the opportunity to remain with his mother if it is in his best interest. If the mother fails to oblige to changing behaviors, removing Richard from access to mother would then be the ethical obligation of the social worker. And then competence would be provided by a team of professionals that specialize in child development and behavior interventions. Again, what would be in the best interest of the child's development would have to probably be analyzed by a team of professionals who deal with children, who specialize in child therapy, child psychology, even a pediatrician. And then obviously um, the opposing idea here would be that mother would demonstrate a false effort to rehabilitate, and Richard will be put into a dangerous environment. So she could come with the presentation that she is willing to do the treatment and put on a happy face and pretend her way through that, and then really not solidify that rehabilitation and reform and putting Richard back into a risky situation. So in step 5, we would consult with colleagues and appropriate experts. Obviously, again, I stated before, we would need a team that specializes in child behavior, child development, possibly a pediatrician for a full synopsis of Richard's well-being, medical health included, mental health. Um, we would need probably the assistance of therapists, not only for child but for mother, um, and trying to kind of really get into the deep-seated cause of why Andrea resents Richard or deals with her own issues that reflect in her treatment to Richard. We'd also include, most likely, a legal team who would act in the best interest of the child and the child's rights, but also the mother and her paternal rights of being able to, having that maternal right to your child, and having the team of experts that could collaborate that. 6 would be make the decision and document the decision-making process, would just be documenting all of the previous steps. And 7, monitor, evaluate, and document the decision would be a valuable asset to this case, because Richard is a child, so he would likely need ongoing monitoring as he progresses in age and is with the current foster family he stays with, or ends up getting moved to a more permanent family. Whatever the situation will be, the child will still need to be monitored for treatment in this case. What is the possible role and influence of the social worker in provoking or resolving the dilemma? One of the obvious roles would be to document everything observed during the social worker sessions with mother and child. The reports from the foster parents should also be documented of the verbal and abusive slapping. But I think one of the most important tools here that's going to be for the social worker is to build a rapport with Andrea, to kind of dig deeper into the resentments that she festers towards Richard, or the social worker may find out that the issue is not even with Richard at all. And I think that building that rapport kind of allows for the social worker and the mom, Andrea, to build a trusting relationship, perhaps allowing the social worker to really get to know Andrea as a person entirely, not just as this unfit mother for Richard. So that will kind of let down that bias that the social worker might develop as like, um, hey, I just need to get this child away from this mother who mistreats him, and kind of learn more about Andrea and actually understand her needs as a mom and as a person individually, so that she could, fully get treatment for the underlying reasons of why she mistreats Richard. Um, and then that also would that would really also help Andrea maybe feel more trust to work through her issues with the social worker, and giving, provided resources so Andrea can kind of build that trust and would be more willing to participate in the services offered to her. However, if the social worker is not attempting to build that rapport with Andrea, it's also important to know that it may be easier to create the bias with her, and that would affect the mother's ability towards getting her son back and working on herself, and kind of just basically being shortchanged on the opportunity to reform. So rapport building also helps build trust between Andrea and the social worker. With the trust built, it may be easier for the social worker to assess if Andrea is really willing to change, or if she even wants to change. So if there's a bias against the mother, the social worker may create more barriers for Andrea, provide less resources, and discourage Andrea from trying to do better uh, for herself and her child. It's important for the social worker to promote the best outcome for both the mother and child. But at the end of the day, if Andrea is not willing to do the work to rehabilitate, and she's not showing her part on the doing her part on the action end, then it would be in the best interest of the child to be removed from um, the abusive interactions that she has with Andrea. What are the ethical principles according to the code of ethics that are relevant to the scenario? There are there are several ethical principles that apply in this case. First, there is social justice. Since Andrea is a teenage mother, she is a statistic, and she's had less of an advantage to provide for her and her child. She may lack educational and financial resources to care for her child. So her aggressive and her abusive behavior toward her son may indicate that she suffers from emotional or mental health issues as well. So this makes Andrea a member of a vulnerable population, as well as Richard, and ethically both clients must be served to the best of their ability. Second, dignity and worth of a person plays a significant role in this case also. While it may seem that the immediate need is to remove Andrea from Richard's life because she's negligent and abusive, a social worker must analyze the need to support each individual involved. So that would be getting help for Andrea and Richard. And Andrea deserves dignity and worth, and to be provided with the resources and opportunity to be a better mother for her child. Next, the importance of human relationships is an evident ethical value in this case scenario. The mother child relationship is a special relationship that cannot be replaced by any other relationship. Andrea and Richard should be allotted the chance to build a strong bond, and the opportunity to allow Andrea to learn, grow, and heal for her son would honor this value. And then lastly, the value of competence should be recognized as well. The social worker should note that what is best for Andrea's mental state may not be within the scope of experience for them. The same goes for the child involved. It may be important for the social worker to include mental health professionals, child psychologists, family therapists, and similar sources to allow for full competency on what is best for mother and child.
For the next few slides, we're going to take a look at some of the ethical dilemmas that a social worker could be presented with while handling this case, as well as potential biases and issues that you might come across while handling this case. And then we'll look at some of the ways that we can try to mitigate some of those problems that we might come across. There are a few components within this scenario that may prove challenging. The first involves our call to advocate for the well-being of others. We have been notified that a child is being attacked, both physically and verbally, during visitations with the mother. Our initial reaction may be to proceed with terminating the mother's parental rights because we are focusing on the immediate threat to the child. However, we don't know the effect this could have on the child and their mother long term. We dismiss this notion in favor of an approach that allows for the possibility of reunification. Because the value of service revolves around helping those in need, our ethical principles may be compromised. The child may potentially be exposed to further abuse for an unknown amount of time while attempting to implement our proposed approach. Reunification will also require the mother's cooperation and willingness to change, which could prove to be a major obstacle to keeping the family together. Another question that arises from this case is, what services have been provided in the 3.5 years since the child was removed from the mother? We are given no indication that these are new behaviors. So why are they just now being addressed? Why was the option of terminating parental rights brought forth without any alternative solutions being presented? These questions could potentially call into question the competence of the social worker, which would be in violation of another core value. Ideally, the social worker would seek help from their supervisor or colleagues, research parental rights, or consult a legal professional, as well as view similar cases to observe what services were provided and ascertain the outcome for both parent and child. Lastly, the importance of human relationships appears to be ignored in this case. There is no mention of services offered, such as counseling, for example, that could jumpstart the healing process and repair the relationship between mother and son. But aside from the relationship between mother and child, there also appears to be a strain in the relationship between the mother and the social worker. The social worker describes the client as a teenage mother who is angry and hostile. That is all. We are not presented with an idea of who this woman is as a whole. Instead, we are given a very narrow-minded view of the client that has been summed up in 2 words. The social worker should work to improve their standing with the client so that they can learn to view them as a multi-dimensional person. It is important that our clients are treated with dignity and respect in order to trust us to advocate for them during some of the most challenging times in their lives. Seeking to understand the client and allowing for grace could drastically improve the relationship and prevent biases. We are also not provided with a clear view of the relationship between the mother and the foster parents. They reported that she abuses the child and does not visit often, but there is not any indication that they know her on a more personal level or have made an attempt to do so. Because the child is in their care, having the foster parents fully on board with our chosen course of action would prove beneficial. Personal bias towards the mother's demeanor or personality could result in decisions being made that are harmful to both clients. Another bias to be wary of is our personal feelings towards teenage pregnancy. While this could have some bearing on the case, it is important not to let this one element be the sole determinant in the chosen solution. Another potential conflict within this case is the possibility that the social worker is triggered by any of the conditions presented, such as child abuse and neglect, abandonment, aggression and hostility, etc. Someone struggling to conceive may have a hard time understanding the mother's minimal involvement. A person's own childhood experiences with the foster system could impact the decisions they make in regards to clients. Within this scenario, the social worker will need to be aware of their own emotions and triggers to find a productive way to cope. Attending counseling, discussing with their supervisor, or handing the case over to a colleague are also options to mitigate personal conflicts.
And so we arrive to question 7. Using the Reamer model, how should the scenario be resolved? Resolving the scenario consists of identifying the social work values and duties that conflict. In this case, Andrea has, in her frustrations, verbally expressed multiple times that she is willing to surrender her parental rights. While the social worker could easily present the surrendering papers for Andrea to sign off on, ethically speaking, the social worker also has the obligation to offer other options that could present an alternative end result for the client. Who will be impacted? Andrea, her son Richard, and the foster parents will be the individuals that will be directly impacted. We should also consider that whatever decision is made will have a long-lasting impact on Andrea and Richard. After considering all courses of actions, the reasons in favor and against each possible action, consulting with other colleagues in the scenario, having documented the verbal testimonials of all parties involved, we have concluded the following. All options should be exhausted for Andrea before helping her surrender her rights as a parent. She should consider getting help with regards to how she feels about her role as a mother, her rights as a mother, her current state of mind, and any other issue that may be leading her to experience these angry outbursts and frustrations toward her son, Richard. Options and resources to consider: connecting Andrea to before surrendering rights to Richard, one-on-one psychotherapy, parenting classes, anger management classes, and substance abuse classes / Alcoholics Anonymous per se, if it pertains to Andrea. Question 8. What are the consequences if the scenario is not resolved? The client, Andrea, could end up seriously hurting Richard in a future interaction. That's 1. 2, Andrea will continue with her current frustrations without finding a solution to her situation. And 3, if the scenario is not resolved, it can be the case that Richard develops some type of anxiety and ill feelings towards his mother as he continues to get older because of how he is treated. And so we arrive at question 9. Are there any alternatives to the chosen resolution that would be considered ethically appropriate and responsible if taken? An alternative to the chosen resolution could also be to expedite the assistance to have Andrea surrender her rights as a mother without many options being offered to Andrea. One can argue that because Andrea was so adamant about her not wanting to be part of Richard's life, she has indeed had ample time to reflect on her decision, and it may be the case that she has just not had anyone that can help her with the surrendering of her rights. It could also be the case that she does indeed believe that not being part of her son's life is overall the best thing to do for all parties involved, and she has given deep thought to this consideration. The option to follow through with her surrender of rights should be an option that a social worker should consider after using their professional judgment once they are done discussing the situational factors and future with Andrea.